I think everybody here in this room will be agreed that there is no alternative to climate action. The devastating results of climate change are already being felt in some parts of the globe. Droughts and floods, extreme weather events, heat waves, and the breaking off of ice shelves, of course, and the sea levels rising. They're all causing human suffering and, on the other hand, economic losses and unforeseen extent. The only choices we as humanity and all our governments have are investment in stringent policy making and financing of climate measures now or later at a much higher cost when the hurdles will be higher. With scientific evidence and the present trajectory of 2.7, 2.8 degree warming this century, we see that all the discussion, whether it be in G7, G20, or, for example, at the Petersberg Climate Dialogue, are really focusing on the globally unified or endorsed action plan working where everyone needs to chip in. Solutions now seem to be different than 10 years ago. It's more looking at coalitions of the willing and advancing with ambition, and I see nods here already. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the different pathways and the ideas that are already on the table, because the one thing we can't afford to lose is time. And that, of course, is also part and parcel of the GSS discussions. So let me just quickly introduce my panelists today. And forgive me not starting with the ladies, with the lady. We're going alphabetically. Hans-Peter Lankes, visiting professor in practice at the LSE, London School of Economics, member of the G20 panel on capital adequacy, as well as co-chair of India T20 task force on reforming global finance, etc., etc. But in this context, most important, you were the co-author together with Nick Stern on the base report for the collaborating and delivering of climate action through the Climate Club, which brings me to Vera Rodenhoff, one of the proponents through being part of the German government and therefore through being part of the G7. And you, Vera, are in the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, and we all know that the G7 have come up with the idea. You then came up with a report afterwards, and the Climate Club is growing. I think the recent edition, Kenya, so congratulations on getting another member on board. And last but not least, and I see certainly Kurt Vandenberger already with us, Director General of the European Commission. Thank you so much, Kurt, for being here. You are the Director General of DG Climate, and of course, you are sort of one of the working arms and pushing forward arms of the Timmermans cabinet, and therefore also of the von der Leyen cabinet. Now, let's get started, and ladies and gentlemen, just for your information, we are actually waiting for a fourth participant, simply because Jayant Sinha put forward one other big proposal, but seeing that he isn't there, I'm just going to sort of make you the eagle for our round, Peter. Peter, we have a number of proposals out there, and it seems like it really is these days, it's not like we have to get all 200 countries on board and have to endorse the same policy. That might be an idea at the COP and COP28 in Dubai coming up, of course. But it seems that on the practical way, it is much more like we need to get coalitions together. We need to get not started with thinking, but started with implementation and with concrete implementation. What's your take? How do you observe that?
Yeah, no, first I want to absolutely agree with what you say. I think we need to move forward, and because to move forward with 200 countries in the UN process is extremely difficult. There are always laggards. It is important that those who can and those who are committed do so, especially if we can if we can get a critical mass of countries to come together. And I think that's the idea of the Climate Club. It is that committed countries that account for a very large share of global emissions are willing to move ahead, even if there isn't a full consensus on all these measures. I think it's important to kind of look at the bottom line. In the end, climate action has to lead to investment and it has to lead to innovation. And we have to see what is it that's missing, what is blocking those steps towards investment and innovation as we have them. And I think countries there are different stories, there are different logics and motivations. In the global north, it would tend to be domestic motivations for the most part, but also a fear of free riding, a sort of who moves first kind of attitude in certain areas. We know about concerns about carbon leakage, for instance, and those things make it harder also to sell domestically, that you would move with greater ambition than other countries. In the global south, it's overwhelmingly the question of finance and the cost of finance, the ability to put in place this investment, this path of investments that we need. So a club, if we want to create a framework in which countries feel comfortable to move forward, we have to address these concerns. And that's, I think, what the Climate Club should allow us to do.
Thank you so much. As I said, we have the proponent or the co-author of the Global Climate Alliance for Accelerated Climate Action, not with us yet, but he's going to come around, and also you know enough about that to share the ideas with us later. But Vera, of course, the German government, when it held the G7 presidency, put forward this idea of a climate club. And I think there's still a lot of, let me say, haziness around it, whilst you get people on states on board. Could you just sort of take us along, in a nutshell, why this club? And it seems that they're not just the northern countries in it, but they're also countries of the south. So it is not just this idea of climate equality and financial solidarity.
Yes, well, the Climate Club was initiated under our G7 presidency, but it is not at all a G7 or developed country club. It is an open and inclusive club, and the goal of the Climate Club is to support ambitious action on mitigation approaches, and it has a special focus on industry decarbonization. And it also supports non-developed countries in also being a part of this club. But so why these different clubs? As you said, I mean, we're very far away from reaching or keeping 1.5 within reach. If we look at the NDCs that we have right now, even if they were all implemented, they wouldn't get us to 1.5. This is why we need ambitious action. And this is why there are several coalitions, clubs, alliances, whatever you might want to call them, that address different aspects, and they have different members to be able to get to 1.5. So, and the Climate Club itself, as I said, focusing on mitigation approaches, on industry decarbonization. This is where it is different from other clubs, alliances, like which we are also part of, where we address different topics. And the idea is that we look at the different mitigation approaches we have. We see how they also compare and how they can also be ambitious in their own way. And with that, address the risk of carbon leakage so that those countries who have ambitious climate mitigation approaches, they are not lagging behind and then the carbon emissions move elsewhere. So we want to create a field where all can be ambitious. And the focus on industry decarbonization is especially important. There are not very many alliances yet that have this specific focus. And industry carbon is around 1/4 of the energy-related emissions. Heavy intensive industries from steel, cement, chemicals are around 70% of that. So we need to target this, and this is what the Climate Club does. We are looking to have standards, methodologies, front runners around these industries to create green lead markets. That's why the club is attractive in itself to countries, because if we create these green lead markets, all will profit. And of course, it has to be just. And the Climate Club supports countries in being able to, together with us, reach these common targets to actually create the right framework conditions for decarbonized industries, green markets on that. So this is essentially what the Climate Club does. But let me underline again, it is not at all a northern club at all. It was never intended as such. We have 20 members as it stands right now, and there are many countries also from the global south.
And gearing up to get more until COP28 in Dubai.
Of course.
Okay. Now, Kurt, you've been listening, and as I was preparing for this session, I thought, I mean, in a way, the EU is already a climate club in itself, just by definition of having this one unified strategy, by having the Green Deal, by going 55 by 2030, by having up to 20 different changes to existing regulations. So what of this strategy that the EU follows could actually be transferred into the international discussion and into international frameworks?
Yes, good morning. Happy to be with you. And it's interesting to think about the EU as a club, indeed. We want to expand the club as far as climate action is concerned, for sure. I think climate is, and we all agree, is a global common good for humanity. Not so much for the planet, but for humanity. So we need global cooperation and we need global governance. That's why for the EU, it's very important that we remain within the multilateral system. The UNFCCC, the COP, the yearly COP, but also other organizations like WTO are very important. But as you said in your introduction, time is pressing. We can't wait for the whole world to agree. So we need a lot of alliances, partnerships, bilateral cooperation to really go much faster in climate action. And with the Paris Agreement, the principle now is that international climate governance is rooted in domestic action. It is really through nationally determined contributions that the whole world together has to take care of the climate. And that is exactly what European Union is doing with the Green Deal. As you said, we now have agreements on the Fit for 55 package. We know that we will achieve an emission reduction of at least 55% by 2030, and Europe will become the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And that is because climate in the EU is no longer only an environmental policy. It is really a new growth and innovation strategy, as the professor was also saying. What we now need is to reach out to the rest of the world and make sure that we work with all countries in the world as part of this Paris Agreement and make sure that everyone benefits from this economic and societal transformation. And it's in that context, indeed, that initiatives like the Climate Club are very welcome. The Climate Club is inclusive. It is not exclusive. And we certainly from the EU want to work with our partners in the world, showing how our policy mix in the EU of combining pricing of pollution with regulation, with target setting, and with mobilizing of funding, how this can help us achieve our climate goals. So we are very much supportive of initiatives like the Climate Club, which should be, and I think that's important, prosperity enhancing for the countries in the South, so that climate action is not a restrictive policy to push down economic growth and development, but quite to the contrary, that climate action becomes a growth-enhancing, sustainable prosperity-enhancing agenda for everyone, including and notably in the global South.
Thank you so much, Kurt, for the kickoff of the idea. We need to go a little bit more into detail in a moment. Yeah, Peter, I still like you to sort of have or keep the eagle's view with the global structure that we have. We know, and I'm just repeating what's out there, that the cause of climate change, the climate crisis, of course, lay historically with the northern countries, the countries of the so-called global south are the ones that are suffering most right at the moment from it. And of course, there's always been this discussion about, well, you caused it, you've got to pay. These days, the idea that with the growth, especially in the four most populous countries, there is also a certain responsibility of the countries of the South to participate in reducing carbon emissions, but they want money for it. So how do we go about it in an equitable way and also in a way that in the end serves our goal? What kind of structures do we need?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I wouldn't quite frame it as they want money for it. I would say they have a huge challenge, much larger than in the global north, because they have to grow at the same time as replace their capital stocks. Yeah. And over the next decades, the vast majority of the capital stock that we're going to have in 2030 is yet to be invested in the global south, and even more so by 2050. And a key problem there is the cost of capital. It's not so much that this is a sort of a budgetary issue or a cost in the narrow sense of the word. These are investments. And I think by and large in the global south it's well understood that these are investments that will eventually also be sort of yield growth, but they have to be financed. And the numbers there are quite staggering, and the cost of finance is very high. So when in India today you want to do a 20-year investment in renewable energy, you have to expect 3 or 4 percentage points more in the interest spread than what you would have in Germany. You do that over 20 years, it becomes by far the biggest share of the cost of these investments is the cost of finance. So what the Global South collectively wants is action to increase the volumes and reduce the cost of finance. And this, for the most part, we're not talking about charity. We're talking about investments that have a commercial sense, for the most part. The second thing that we will need, though, is also an increase in concessional finance, because we have a huge adaptation problem. And if we look at what you said, the global south is generally hasn't caused the problem, but is suffering most of the consequences. That also means there has to be action to deal with these consequences. And adaptation finance is generally less amenable to commercial investments. Adaptation investments would be less often revenue generating. And so the need for concessional finance is also very important. And so this is one thing I wanted to perhaps mention. There's a very important focus of the Climate Club on sector transition, sector decarbonization path, especially in the heavy emitting sectors. And I think there's a great logic to this because it's a win-win. Most countries have an interest in coming together. But we also have to address the finance dimension. And for the Global South to join this club, it will want to see solutions on the finance side.
Thank you so much. Which, of course, I turn my eyes to Vera straight away. What kind of actions does the German government at the moment already take in the direction of, let's say, looking at adaptation, looking at loss and damages, and maybe you look even beyond the boundaries of your ministry and look what AA does, the Foreign Office, and what the Ministry for Economic Cooperation Development does?
Well, I mean, this is a broad field. So you have the whole aspect of climate finance, and Germany is one of the countries when we are very engaged to living up to our commitment of having the 100 billion.
Yeah.
And we are striving to have 6 billion in climate finance by 2025. So already we are very involved in that. Of course, our ministry has many projects in the International Climate Initiative, where we support countries in the transition to sustainable, also sustainable, profitable, in not only industry but economies, also on biodiversity, climate action. So we are very much involved there. Many of these projects also support the just transition. We are also partnering with other countries in just energy transition partnerships, many of which were launched during the last years. On adaptation, there's much going on adaptation. We are at one point, we have all together come up with deciding on the loss and damage mechanism at the last COP in Sharm el-Sheikh. Germany presented the Global Shield there. We are supporting adaptation finance, and we know it's even more difficult to get private investments for adaptation than it is for mitigation. And one key aspect is having the right framework conditions for mitigation, but possibly also for adaptation. Then linking adaptation to mitigation, because there are always those two aspects. We are looking also how can we increase private finance in both. We have to look at de-risking instruments. We have to look at the currency exchange risks. And coming back to the Climate Club, which is specifically in the fields of industry decarbonization, all over the place, we have to get the framework conditions right to get private investments there. But of course, I mentioned at the outset, we are also very involved and committed to public finance and concessional finance, as I mentioned.
Before we get more into finance, let's still stay at one level. And of course, shifting the trillions was already something that the World Bank put out a number of years ago. So that's nothing new. Kurt, let me get back to your start. And of course, I did not want to compare the EU to being a club. All I'm saying is it's a group of many nations that are endorsing the same policy and therefore are even there at different levels of speed going along with the ultimate goal. What would you say, and I didn't hear the answer to that in the last statement, what would you say from the learnings that you have had in the last couple of years trying to get speed? What could one transfer to the North-South dialogue and to a North-South framework?
Yes, let me first say that I don't feel personally offended at all by your comparison of the EU to a club. I think sometimes we would do well by feeling more like a club in the EU. But to your question, what are the learnings from us? Well, first, I think what is very important is political will, leadership at the highest level, to have a consistent course for climate action. I think that is what the European Union has been doing, also with at the instigation of the European Commission, I dare say, because when we launched the European Green Deal in 2019, we were often told, well, why does Europe does this on its own? You're completely isolated. We're now in 2023, and we see that the whole world is moving very quickly in this space of climate action. And through the pandemic, through the Ukraine war, the very dreadful Ukraine war, and the challenges we face for energy in Europe, we have stayed the course on climate action. And that is because there is political will at the highest level in the EU. But more than that, I think there's also an increasing understanding that protecting the climate is not just good for the climate, but it is also a new growth and innovation strategy. A model of economic growth based on fossil fuels and wasting of resources is finished. There is no future in this. And we need a lot of investment and innovation in Europe to enhance our productivity and a new form of growth. And that is also what the European Green Deal, together with the digital agenda, has been able to do. And then thirdly, what we also learn and have learned is that it is very important to have a proper mix of policy instruments. What we have done with the Fit for 55 is putting a price on pollution because nature cannot bear the price of pollution anymore, the cost of that. So we price pollution through an emission trading system that generates revenues. Last year alone, the ETS in 1 year generated 38 billion euros of revenues, which we are reinvesting in climate action, both for industrial innovation and for social justice, so that we leave no one behind. That's essential, that the climate action is combined with a proper social policy. And we couple this with regulation there where the markets are not moving quickly enough. We set targets, for example, for renewable energy, energy efficiency, and other areas, some binding, some aspirational. And we have a framework for unleashing public and private investment. And it's that policy mix that will enable us to achieve our goals, and which we would also like to export to the rest of the world, so that we all move in the same direction. But I would say, in wrapping up, political leadership, a very strong social agenda, and a big emphasis on combining the legal instruments with incentives for investment and innovation are probably what are needed everywhere in the world.
Thank you so much, Kurt. Now, Peter, I'm just going to, Hans-Peter, I'm going to put sort of something on you, which simply because you've talked with him on so many panels before, you probably can run it off, and you were also involved in the other report. Seeing that Jayant Sinha is obviously not with us, even though we would have liked to have had the voice of a representative of the G20 presidency here, and of course also a person who has actually put forward the Global Climate Alliance for Accelerated Climate Action. Could you, having been involved with both, one as a lead author and one as one who was involved, could you just point out the major differences and maybe even explain why we need two ideas for the same goal, two concepts?
Yeah, let me try to do that. And it's a pity that Jayant isn't here, because he's a very powerful advocate of the idea. And one difference is important. It's called an alliance. It's not called a club, and that's quite consciously on their part. The concept, the notion of a club, especially in sort of the Anglo-Saxon understanding of it, suggests exclusivity. The idea is that it should suggest inclusivity. Therefore, it's called an alliance. I think we should call this the climate fan club, or the climate support club. And it would make it clear what we're really intending to do. The other major difference is not so much of content, because the Climate Alliance idea touches all the issues that Vera has set out from the G7 perspective as well. It's more a matter of emphasis. And the emphasis there is very clearly on finding solutions for the finance problem. So a good part of the report is about finding solutions, and it's very innovative in a sense. It asks the question: look, we have talked about billions to trillions. You said that for many years. We know that we need all this money, but it's not happening. In fact, if you look at the past few years since the Paris Agreement, net finance flows to developing countries have declined. They have not gone up. So what is it? How are we going to get there? And it provides a range of ideas for how an alliance could come together to push solutions to the finance problem. And that ranges from official finance. So can we scale up ODA I think most of us have very little hope that this would be scaled up very considerably, but maybe there are other sources. Maybe we can tap carbon markets for global climate action. Maybe we can have a global IRA or a global Fit for 55, and use tax credits to encourage investments, for instance, by institutional investors in the global south. So maybe we have to widen our range of options there. The second thing that it looks at is private finance and how we can scale up private finance. And there are regulatory obstacles to scaling up private finance. For instance, Basel III tends to make it hard for banks to finance long-term investments in the global south for a variety of reasons. Can we take another look at that? Basel III was not designed with the needs of the global south in mind. It was not designed with the needs of the climate transition in mind. But other things as well. So blended finance options can get more bang out of the blended finance buck. Right now, it's pretty pitiful, actually, what we're getting there, and other options. And then the third area is how to use the multilateral development banks better than we do. And you mentioned I'm on this panel, the G20 panel on that, and we concluded that there was considerable space for scaling up at very little cost to anyone, scaling up climate finance through the multilateral development bank system. And that's perhaps the lowest hanging fruit of all. And for a climate alliance, a climate club of major shareholders in these institutions to come together and say, we're going to push this now. That would be, for me, something we should do today.
As much a reform of the World Bank that you're quite familiar with?
The World Bank is part of it, but it's a multilateral development banking system, which today finances about $180 billion a year and provides a new finance. And that can probably scale up to $500-600 billion if one does it in the right way.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I'm turning to Vera, and I'm going to ask you the next question, just get ready. We would love to have a round with you, sort of taking 3 questions from the members of the audience, targeted questions. Again, Vera, sort of, holding up the hat for the whole of the German government. The question is, there are many aspects and many screws that you're trying to turn right at the moment, many hubs that you're trying to get going. One of them is, and right at the moment we don't have a member of the business community here, giving the incentives for business to do the right things. Again, what kind of framework does business need? What kind of framework are you envisioning as far as international cooperation is concerned?
Well, that's a very broad question. Just coming.
You pick out what you want.
Just one. Let me say one thing. Even though the climate club is called a club, it is not an exclusive club. I think there is a misunderstanding there, and I would just like to underline it. It is basically a club which you can join if you will have the goal of ambitious climate action in line with the Paris Agreement and the decisions there under, and are also willing to extend that to decarbonizing industry. Then you can join. So just to make that very clear.
May I quickly chip in? It's of course, Hans-Peter, what you said, it's sort of this idea of London clubs, which are exclusive, and the idea of a football club in Germany where everybody can chip in as long as they go in the right direction. So I understand.
So what we do for businesses or also private finance, and I already alluded to that in my last answer to the last question, is really, I think it's important for business to have a certain amount of certainty to get the framework conditions right, to know that to get the signals right, what do we need to invest in, what to no longer invest in, because it creates lock-ins for a world which exceeds the boundaries of 1.5 and other planetary boundaries. So that is very important. And this is the clearest signal we can give in Germany and in the EU. We are giving it through our legislation, where we are saying, look, this is the path we are on. This is what you have to invest in. These investments, if you invest there in fossil technologies, in sooner or later, and actually rather sooner, you will be having stranded assets, and giving the right signals there and working on that with partners over a range of topics, and this far exceeds the topic of the climate club and heavy industry, to see that in all these fields, be it business, industry, but it's also agriculture, it's infrastructure, which is very important, to give out the right signals. How can we create the right infrastructure together with our partners to not have these lock-ins?
The right infrastructure, and I'm looking at Kurt again, a number of EU regulations have either been introduced or enhanced in the last couple of years, like, for example, the deforestation supply chain regulation. So how important are those regulations that may not have sort of the proper names and the big names, but are quite effective on the EU footprint?
Well, they are important and they are part of an overall strategy. I think we have our act together now in the EU with the Fit for 55. We are confident we will reach our targets, but obviously if the EU, which represents about 7% of global CO2 emissions, does it on its own, it won't make that much of a difference for the climate. So we need to get the rest of the world on board. How can we do this? Well, first by succeeding in the implementation of Fit for 55. We really are, if I could say, condemned to succeed, so that we have leadership by example vis-à-vis the rest of the world. Secondly, it's to go for win-win, lasting, sustainable partnerships with the Global South, where we help these countries to move up the value chain in pursuit also of climate action, so that it is prosperity enhancing for them, as well as helping the climate. And thirdly, and that's where I come to your point, it's about clearly signaling and saying that Europe will remain open to trade, but it will increasingly want to buy clean products and not dirty products. And that's where regulations come in, like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, like the deforestation regulation, but also increasingly our whole program about eco-design, which will enhance sustainability requirements on products. So Europe will always be open for trade. We're not in the business of setting local content requirements, but we will go increasingly for sustainability requirements. And we will help the Global South through these partnerships and with sufficient investment and climate finance, so that they can also benefit from this transformation and continue to export to the European market, and in this way enhance their prosperity. I would just like to say that as far as climate finance is concerned, we are working, as Vera was saying, towards the 100 billion goal. This is very important. But may I say that Europe is doing more than its fair share. Chancellor Scholz last week or 2 weeks ago at the Petersburg summit pledged another 2 billion euros. We are close to 25 billion euros, I believe, as far as Europe is concerned, which is much bigger than what other developed countries in the world are doing. But I agree, of course, with Hans-Peter that this will not be enough. We need a massive program of investment in the South. And for that, we're also putting into gear our Global Gateway program.
Thank you, Kurt. I reduced to 2 questions due to time, but still, who might have, I think the lady at the back and one person from that side, the gentleman over there. So could you please get the microphones to them? Madam, could you quickly just give us your name?
Good morning. My name is Sayyida Aisha Farooq, and I'm honored to be one of the Young Global Changer 2018. Coming from one of the country from Global South, Pakistan, it took me many months to understand the recycling at home. And once I understood it, I found it's a quite an interesting hobby. My question to everyone here, please try to invest on the projects in countries like ours, where we can educate women about the kitchen gardening and waste management at home. Because in our societies, no matter how much investment you bring, once the corruption is socially accepted, you cannot bring any change, trust me. So educate women about global changes in the capacity of waste management and kitchen gardening at homes. I run as a researcher from my own finances because my government in Pakistan doesn't have any interest in such nonsense. So please think about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Hi, my name is Obogu Kalu. I'm actually a student here at ESMT. I would like you to talk more, if you could, on how you plan to monitor like decarbonization, like in an international context, and if you have like measures that are equivalent to how you monitor it like in a European context. So I don't know if that's clear enough, but get the issue of decarbonization and investing on ways to reduce decarbonization. But in terms of measuring, like how international partners are meeting this goal, could you talk a bit more about that?
Thank you so much for your questions. Apologies to everybody else who had questions and couldn't pose them. I'd like to have a very, very brief, because otherwise we're going to be pushed off stage, last round. So in less than a minute, could you, maybe I'll start with Kurt. On the road to COP28, what do we need to do most urgently in the next half year?
Well, clearly, for us, the priority is more ambition in mitigation. All the rest is very important, but we are in a critical decade, so we need the world to come together to increase drastically the ambition for mitigation. The rest is needed for this, including climate finance, including adaptation, etc. But a higher urgency for mitigation is really what is needed, and that's what we're working for in the run-up to COP28.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for sticking to your time, Vera.
Totally agree. Making it a little bit more concrete on the focus on mitigation next to adaptation and finance. We need to phase out coal, and we need to have, and we are working on this, the G7 already agreed to it, and we want to extend it on the way to Sharm el-Sheikh. Also global goal for renewables deployment and energy savings and energy efficiency. And just to that question, the UNFCCC has mechanisms around reporting and measuring MRV, etc. So look into that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hans-Peter.
I think mitigation is absolutely important for the world, but if you look at it from Africa, adaptation is the much more pressing concern. So we cannot really de-link these two things. If we need a package solution, and that's also what the Climate Club is in fact about. It is about bringing countries with different motivations together so that they can address their most pressing concerns. We need adaptation solutions as well.
Can I say thank you to all the panelists and also in spirit to Yayan Sina, who probably has had a very important reason not being with us. It might just be the IT that didn't work. Kurt, thank you very much for taking the time, the two of you, for having been here. And ladies and gentlemen, just one last word. We need to keep up the speed. We need to be earnest and honest about it and just do things. There are so many solutions out there. Let's do it not just in the next half year, but until 2030, because otherwise it's not just time that's running out, but nature will just turn. And I think that's something that we've said at GSS many times, many years before. It is getting more urgent.